Yeah, hi, how's it going? I am Misko. Just so you know, like this is the big monitor I have and a camera for coding, and then over here I actually have a second monitor and I see all your faces. So when I'm looking over here, it's not that I'm ignoring you; I'm actually looking at you. But this is where the talking is. So I let's see, I did this thing called Angular, and then after 16 years at Google, I decided to leave and joined a startup called Builder. And at Builder, I'm the CTO, and we're working on this super cool project called Qwik that we're going to talk about today. Also on the call with me here are Adam Bradley, who did this thing called Stencil you might have heard of, also Ionic, so super famous guy as well. And then we have Manu, who's also worked on Stencil and some amazing Go framework as well. So some pretty cool people working on Qwik. So you can ask questions to them as well. Anyways, the plan for today, I think, would be to kind of build something very simple. And I want you guys to participate. So like ask questions, don't, if I go too fast or something's not clear, bug me, etc. And then hopefully after we do this week, we'll kind of a demo of how to build something with Qwik. Next week, you guys can help us making sure that it's easier for people to get started, right? So the whole point or the whole interest of this thing is to get feedback on what works, what doesn't work, what can be improved, and so on and so forth. But yeah, interrupt me all along and ask questions to kind of get started. Okay, so let's get started. So there is npm create Qwik at latest. So this is the command, our CLI, that allows us to build or kind of get things going. And so let's run this, and it's asking for the project name. So let's just call it Qwik demo. And we're going to use Qwik City. So what is Qwik City? So most frameworks, like if you look at existing frameworks like Angular, Vue, Svelte, React, right? They usually have a meta framework around it. And the best explanation of a meta framework, I think, is that it's just the thing that does file-based routing. File-based routing meaning that how you lay out your components on your Git repository is basically determining your URLs that you have for your application. So Qwik City is the equivalent of this meta frameworks on top of Qwik.
I also, if I may interrupt you, Misko,
yeah, absolutely.
also feel like the frameworks realize that things change so fast that if you don't make your framework in layers, you really like hard innovation, right? At some point, the framework was like, this is the framework, right? And it tries to do every single thing. So then you break it, you want to innovate, and you kind of have to break with everything. And kind of this meta framework is a way to say, we have Qwik, which is kind of the core, and we can say that this is going to be very, very stable. It's very, very feature-proof, and then we can innovate, and kind of have like, if routing goes in specific ways or these trends, we can have Qwik City that kind of experiments with these different ideas without breaking the core. No? I feel like this is such a good take from the React community.
Right, it's a framework that uses another framework, right? This is like the metaphor.
Yeah, that's kind of what the meta framework is, yeah. So then you need to choose your server. So Express is basically when you develop locally. I think that's a good start, but we support Cloudflare, Netlify, and we have a few others in the works. So over time, you should see more and more of these things here. So let's choose Express, and sure, we'll do prettier, and we have our demo. So if I do city Qwik
Misko,
demo,
pay attention that there are questions in the chat.
So... Oh yeah. Fastify, I think Fastify is coming. We already have a pull request for that. If somebody already answered that, just haven't merged.
Okay. Adam and Manu are on the chat.
Thank you, Adam and Manu. Thank you. So this is our project.
Qwik. It's funny because more like the Fastify, some developer contributed so fast, and we can keep changing things still. Like we haven't merged because we keep changing things in Qwik City. So that's why it never got merged. But now it's a good, a better spot now.
Yeah, and really the architecture to add, Vercel, all of them is extremely simple. It's just kind of, they have their own little quirky way to do a request and response. That's just all that middleware is. It's just how do I handle their way of doing a request and response. And so even if you look at any of them now, you'll see that it's not very much code. So we can add them all. It's just we're kind of at day zero right now of getting Qwik City to work.
Yeah, even since an easy first issue, see how the little like middleware for Cloudflare or Netlify is kind of like copy the folder and do the ones for everything there is, like to be pretty simple.
Yeah, and the other big one that I plan on adding there is doing a static site generator, which should be pretty cool to add. Whereas like it's just creating static HTML pages, and that whole static directory can be published to wherever that would be. So that's another option too that isn't showing up yet.
Perfect. How are we doing on a font size, by the way?
Could be
bigger.
Yeah, a bit.
Okay, I got another one. So, we got this directory created. You go to Yarn, the standard process, right? You're on to install your packages. And so here's your directory structure. I think the one to kind of talk about here is the source routes. And in here, this is basically the layout system, right? So whatever files you see here are the files that you're going to show up in the URL. So let's see, Yarn finished, and then Yarn start. And that should open up port 3000. Localhost 3000, and let me get the font up. And so we have a standard kind of content showing up here with Qwik City. Now, you could say like, well, why, how does this thing show up? So notice that we are in the kind of base folder. So the base folder means that we are in the routes. And inside of the routes, if you can't find a specific URL, then you end up with index.tsx. And index.tsx just says, welcome to Qwik City, the meta framework for Qwik, which is exactly the content you see here. And you also see that there is a whole bunch of stuff around it. So you can see what's known as a layout. So these headings and footing. So by default, if you go up the directory structure, since we're in a root, we can't really go up any further, but you're looking for underscore layout. That's this file right here. And this file right here says, do the header. The slot is where the actual content goes, and a footer. And if you go into header says, basically has the section href Qwik City, and he has a nav with the blog, docs, API, etc. Right? So this basically controls the content up here, and the same exact thing. If you go to footer, you will basically see the blog, docs, about us, etc. is being controlled by the content over here. Does that make sense?
I also say this is really kind of modeled off of SvelteKit and the newer Next.js pattern, the RFC that they have, the pattern for how layouts would work. And so it's going to look kind of familiar in that if you're familiar with those, that's where it kind of comes from. But even beyond that, it's really kind of comes from something like Jekyll or any sort of static site generator where it's kind of file-based, index being represented by the directory name or the actual name of itself. So like you got the about us.tsx, that's going to be /about-us would be the URL.
Yeah, and also right now we have these routes, and you might see a lot of stuff. We create the starter pretty much as a very thin version out of our testing app. We kind of test all the features. So this is maybe right now a very overly complicated starter with a lot of things, a lot of folder, but route is really that, right? So even if there's a lot of things, it's just like different examples of different paths.
Yeah,
we should improve that.
Just follow that up. Mano is exactly right. Like this is a very throw it together example. And this is where we'd love to get lots of help of like, all right, let's make an easy to use starter that's very simple and easy to understand. Because again, this thing is kind of packed full of like every feature for testing, but we don't need that for starters. And so just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, I think there's somebody asking, what is a host component? So I think that you're referring to this thing right here. I think the easiest way to explain it is, let's see, this is the component that we export, right? It's exported as default. And so this becomes the content that you see here. And what we can do is we can actually say, I want to have a special name called Qwik City -welcome. If I save, the hot module reloading should, do its magic. And if I go to main, here it is, right? So here is the Qwik City welcome. So Qwik has a particular thing, right? So I think before we go down the particular path, we should really talk about like why Qwik. like the world already has so many frameworks. Why do we need another framework? And I promise eventually we'll get to this host thing. And I think the answer is because all other frameworks, the way I look at it is that like the frameworks right now, they compete on DX. In other words, they're like, oh, do you like JSX? Then come to React world. Do you like templates? Then maybe come to Angular world. Do you like your file together with your template, in the same file? Well, maybe Vue or SvelteKit is your answer, right? And so really existing frameworks are competing on a DX. But as far as how these frameworks work, they all work the same exact way. And that is that, there's a piece of JavaScript that executes on a client, and this execution of the client kind of does, updates the UI and so on. And they all have this particular thing called hydration, which we can jump into deeper if you're interested. And I think the point here that I'm trying to make here is that they all fundamentally work the same way. And so making yet another framework that works the same way, I think would be unhelpful to the community and to the world. And so Qwik has something unique, and the unique bit it has is that what we call resumability. And resumability is this idea that the application originally executes on a server, and then it can be transferred over to the client, and on the client, it can just continue where the server left off. And you say, well, why do I care about this? And the answer is because if you look at the network tab, and if we look at, so there's a whole bunch of code that gets downloaded, but the JavaScript code is always prefixed with Q dash. And so I'm going to just filter this out, or maybe I can filter it out by clicking JavaScript here. So the only code that is showing up in terms of JavaScript is Vite. So if you look at these URLs, this is the code that, okay, how do I look at this?
This is only for development. So this is kind of the code that's going to handle the live reloading and some developer experience thing that is never going to be when the application gets built. Like application build will be no JavaScript, basically. Zero JavaScript.
Vite, you're going to see a lot more requests for individual modules. Why Vite is fast for development. But yeah, when you do a production build, that's where you're going to see absolutely no JavaScript.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, jump in. Yeah.
Real quick. Okay, so
quick, haha.
I feel that before the DX and before that, I think that the problem needs to be established. The problem domain, meaning why, even introducing this new thing into the world. And like we talked about before, we talked about instant, right? We want the world goes towards an instant, right, experience, meaning when you load, no matter if it's on mobile or on web, you want the page to load instantly, no matter if it's a low connection. And currently, all the frameworks are having some kind of execution of JavaScript going on first load. This is what they call hydration, right? But so it's either you have an SPA where you download lots of code and execute lots of code, or you have like these meta frameworks who know how to render the HTML from the template, send it, but they all need to also execute the JavaScript to add event listeners, right? Qwik is going about it from a whole nother level or a whole nother angle, which is serializing the entire app, not just the rendered HTML, but also the state and also the event, like the event pointers, let's say, like listeners. Everything, it snapshots on the HTML and send the HTML with all of the context to the client, meaning when the app gets rendered, boom, you have an interactive app with zero JavaScript loaded on first load. And that's the unique thing about Qwik. And that's what enables the instant experience. And this is basically the future of web apps.
Misko, may I say, continue with what Shai said. I think this is something that has been known by customer-centric applications. Like, for example, Google used this approach. Like they didn't use let's say traditional frameworks for their more customer facing product like search. They have this custom framework called Qwik, I think, because they know that this is they know this is what can get the best performance, right? I think the innovation with Qwik is that it brings it, but with the like the developer experience of other frameworks, right? So because in the other, if you choose something, if you want to do something like Qwik, then you will have to write like half your server in JavaScript. You will have to, in Java, like wire up a lot of things manually. Like it was not like good to develop. And Qwik is kind of bringing what the state of the art that was known for 10 years of the best performance you can possibly do, and scale it in terms of DX and use cases, right? I think that's when we think that this is going to get mainstream, because of the friction to get these kind of features is very, very low with Qwik.
Yeah. So I wanted to show you, and I see there's a question that somebody is asking, like, isn't this just a server-side rendering? And the answer is yes, with a very interesting twist that nobody else can do. And so let me answer all of these questions together. And I apologize if it takes a long way to get here, but I think it's important to kind of talk about it. So this is our homepage, Builder.io. One is white, the other one is black. I don't know, I'm not sure why they're not the same. But the content-wise, this is identical page. Both of these pages are absolutely identical. This one is generated using React and Next.js. This one is generated by Qwik. And what I want to show you is I grabbed a performance, what's happening in the browser. And so there's a performance of the first 1.5 seconds here and performance of 1.5 seconds over here as well. And I want you to look at what's happening here. See that all this JavaScript going crazy here? Like if you look at this graph right here, you can just see how crazy the JavaScript is going, trying to render the whole page, right? And this is basically hydration. This is why the websites are slow. And the same exact website built with Qwik, notice just how emptiness is here. Actually, the things that you see here are actually third-party scripts. But if you look at this graph here, notice how all this yellow just essentially disappeared. And again, we are also looking at 1.5 seconds, but not only is this kind of more empty, it finishes in about, under a second. Whereas here, it doesn't really finish until, second 1.2 seconds. Now, this is a fast, modern computer, all that stuff. Now, imagine you're on a mobile device, it gets a lot worse. And so what the innovation that Qwik brings to the table is that we want to get rid of all of these JavaScript so that we can be fast. And so this is a perfect segue to saying, well, isn't this just server-side rendering? And the answer is yes. However, server-side rendering has a particular problem, which is that once it's server-side renders, it's not interactive, right? There's no way you can do anything to the page to make it live. And so people in the past would do server-side rendering, and then they would add something like jQuery to add interactivity. We don't want to mix jQuery with the server-side rendering. Instead, what we want is we want to have a unified mental model of I just develop components all the way through. And sometimes the component runs on a server, and sometimes the component runs on a client. And I shouldn't have to think about this. I just want to build my app, in a natural way, and the right thing should just happen. So the place where server-side rendering fails would be the menu system, right? Like if you just server-side render content, these menus would not work. You would have to do some manual magic to kind of make the menu system work. Or, there is also Twitter over here. There is also, you can chat with us. So there is an app in here that you can interact with, even though a lot of it looks static. But the problem is we don't want to front load all this JavaScript ahead of time and render it. So if we come back to our, so first of all, let me stop here. Does that kind of answer the difference between just the basic server-side rendering and what Qwik is trying to do? Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes. Yeah?
No, there's a question about lazy load via worker.
So I think the
what I
big
meant
difference
is basically how the JavaScript is being loaded. There is JavaScript on the page.
So sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. So in this particular case, yes, there is JavaScript because you need to have stuff over here. And in this particular case, yes, it is loaded using web worker. I think in the case of a Qwik, do we even have JavaScript? Usually it shows up as a prefetch. Oh, sorry, this is a dev version, so it wouldn't show up. But if you go to the homepage if I go to our actual homepage, and Cloudflare needs to get better at serving this stuff, but that's a separate story. Inspect. You can see that we generate these prefetching links at the bottom, right? So we tell the system like, oh, you're going to need all this JavaScript, so like go and prefetch it. The big difference is that we fetch the JavaScript, but we don't execute it, right? Existing systems have two things going against them. One is they download all of the JavaScript, even if the page is static or dynamic, like they can't differentiate. And so all of the JavaScript has to come. So first problem is they download a lot more of it. And the second problem is they have to run hydration. So they have to execute all of that JavaScript and run the reconciliation code in order to kind of get the application going. So we're skipping those two parts, right? So first of all, we download some JavaScript, but it's way, way less. And then for the JavaScript that we download, we don't execute it until you actually interact with the page. Does that make sense? Right. So if you look at this particular page, let's see, let's look at the network tab. Right. So there is, if I refresh this, nothing's showing up here, although the prefetching I would expect to be showing up here. Oh, because it shows up as a different thing. That's what it is. And then if I go and put it in a mobile view, if I click on something, the page is instantly, has interaction. But if you look at the code that had to execute, all of the code comes back as prefetch in here, right? So none of the code actually had to download code, right? It's all available. So Qwik, basically the difference is that Qwik says, instead of being in the business of rendering pages, which is what all the other frameworks are, Qwik says, I actually want to be in the business of the whole thing end to end. I care about server-side rendering. I care about serialization. I care about making the perfect bundle sizes. I care about delivering those bundle sizes to the browser. I care about prefetching those bundle sizes so that they're ready on interaction. And really Qwik basically wants to care about the whole experience, because unless you care about the whole experience, you are not going to end up in an ideal world, because existing frameworks only care about client-side rendering. The server-side rendering is kind of a bolt-on afterwards, and because of it, they end up in this world of hydration. And hydration is kind of a workaround, and there's nothing that they can possibly do to kind of get themselves out of this hydration problem. And it's because, like, fundamentally, the frameworks don't care about things end to end.
I think I want to go back because I see a lot of things from the point of view of developer experience, and we try to match, like, in terms of the authoring of components, how current developers do that right now. But also, I think the next big step is how when you build an application with Qwik, you never have to think about how to make your application fast. Like in other frameworks, right? You start building an application and you just import this and import that, and at some point the application gets slow, and then you see, okay, am I lazy low at this point? You have to think about it, right? Like, it's not like Rollup is going to do it for you. You will have to introduce dynamic import here, moving things around, benchmarking, doing all this stuff, right? And even those, like, all the components that are visible in the page have to be downloaded, and then you have to do a lot of tricks. I think the difference with Qwik is that you don't have to do any of that. Like the Qwik will do it for you. So you never, it doesn't matter if you have 1 million components or 10 components. Like, even if there are a lot of components in your page, like 100 components in your page, but there is a single part that is interactive, only that interactive thing is the one that's going to execute, right? The rest is going to be just HTML, no JavaScript. And I think that also is like, I think the kind of the future is making developers to actually build features, right? And not to spend time optimizing, because we believe, like, as application get more and more complex, the effectivity of developers trying to optimize everything is going to get worse and worse. And it needs to be done at the framework level, at the optimizer, compiler level, like just on the native languages, right? So that's what also allows this level of abstraction that Qwik provides.
So I'm just answering in the chat. Okay, so I think the best thing to do is to kind of do an example. So yes, this so far, what we have written here is static, right? There's no way to interact with it. And so there's no JavaScript being downloaded. So that in itself, I think is not like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, right? Like, it's like, yeah, you just made a static page, we generated stuff. There's no need for HTML. So no need for JavaScript, so no JavaScript got inserted in here. So let's put some interactivity in it. And I think this is the point where things get interesting. Oh, by the way, so the question was about the host. You know what, let me answer the host a little later. So let's add a Qwik here. And let's just say alert hi, right? So I wrote a piece of code here that just alerts me. And notice the beat automatically refreshed the page in the background. And so now if I click on Qwik City, notice again, no JavaScript here. When I click on Qwik City, the alert comes up and the JavaScript downloaded. So and not only that, if you notice what exactly downloaded in terms of JavaScript, it literally just downloaded the alert hi, nothing else, right? It looked at the system and said, okay, what is the minimal amount of stuff that I have to get to the client to make this particular interaction work and nothing else, right? And notice this particular file doesn't even have the framework itself. So even the framework didn't get downloaded. It literally just said, yep, all you need to do is put an alert over here and that's all you need. And so it took this piece of code, it extracted it into a separate file, and it made it so that you can just execute this particular thing, right? And so the point to make over here is that as a developer, you are living in your nice component-based world, right? If you are familiar with Angular, Vue, React, Svelte, you should be like, I know exactly what this is, right? This is just a bunch of components, especially if you're familiar with React. You'll be looking at this and you go like, this looks just like React. And you can just go and develop your code as you normally would. But whereas a React application would be like, oh, well, in order to make this button work, I have to download the component for the header, for the footer, for this component. And in here, I have to register a Qwik listener to make the alert hi work. Qwik was able to kind of look at all this stuff and be like, okay, really, the only thing you need is the listener and nothing else. And so throw away everything else. So at the lowest level of magic of what Qwik is basically this, is that Qwik is really, really, it should be called skip. It's really, really good at being able to throw things away. Now, the question is, how can Qwik do this? And so I like to explain it in terms of virtual machines. I know when virtual machines first came out, my brain was just kind of blown away because I understood that you can have a host machine that inside of which, let's say I have a Mac machine, I boot up a Linux inside of my host, right? And inside of that Linux, I open up, let's say, a Chrome browser, and then I navigate to some page. And then I can save that virtual machines into a disk, into a file. And I can take that file and, send it to all my friends. And all of my friends can open the file up, and they are exactly where I left off, right? They can skip the boot up process. They can skip opening the Chrome. They can skip navigating to the page. They are literally where I left off, and they just continue execution from where we left off, right? And so this is what we mean by resumable, is that Qwik is the same exact thing. Qwik runs on a server. It executes everything, and at some point we pause the execution on the server. We serialize everything. Instead of a file, we serialize everything into HTML, send the HTML as a static content to the browser. Browser is super fast at parsing HTML. So immediately you see everything going and we're done. There's no additional step. There is no additional like, oh yeah, well now we have to go attach listeners, or we have to do this, or we have to download JavaScript, or none of that stuff. Like we're finished, we're done, because it's when you interact with a particular button, we can be extremely surgical and be like, oh yeah, for this button, you only need the alert. You don't need anything else. So there's no need to download everything. We know exactly the bit that you need, and only that bit gets downloaded and executed. And that's why we call it resumable, right? And this is why we are differentiating Qwik between hydration and resumability, because hydration has this problem of essentially, I call hydration frameworks replayable frameworks. What I mean by that is that the code runs on a server to generate your page. Then we send the SSR page to the client. But on the client, the framework, nothing works. It's just HTML. And so what we have to do is we have to replay everything that the server just did. And hopefully, once we replay everything on a client, we will reconcile the DOM and we'll end up in the same exact state that the server ended up in. And so there's no like a sudden generating movement or anything, right? And once we finish replaying, we can then interact with the page. And so if you think about it, you're duplicating work, right? Like the server did a whole bunch of work, and then you're executing the same exact code on the client in order to be able to replay everything so that you can get the system in the same state. And so the current generation of frameworks, I call them replayable, because on the client, they have to replay, they have to redo everything. And I call Qwik resumable, because Qwik literally just like continues where the server left off, right? One of the things I always talk about when I kind of talk about these things is that, like, is there a particular function that had to execute twice, once on the server and once on the client? And the Qwik is really, really wants to make sure that no such thing exists, that if the function executed on the server, then it shouldn't have to execute on the client, and vice versa, right? Like if it executes on the client because it's like a click listener, well then, there's no need to like process that click listener on a server, and so on and so forth. Questions before I go on? Okay, so let's do something more complicated. So this is kind of simple. So let's make a counter example. So let's make a counter and export const counter equals component oops. So the minimal thing the counter needs is a count, and let's just say 0 for now, and a button, which is going to be +1. Why is this red? Yes, you are. It is exported. What am I missing here, guys?
That you are importing already a counter. There is already a
variable. There's a I see. I accidentally imported. Okay, sorry. Okay, so we have a counter, and of course it doesn't do anything because we didn't put any code. So we need to have some state here, and so we say const store equals use store. And in the store, we say count. Let's start counting at 1, 2, 3, just to be different. And so here for the count, we will say store.count. If I save this, then it should, oh, I forgot to import. Okay, so it just says counter 1, 2, 3, but of course the +1 doesn't do anything. And so now let's add behavior. So we say on click. And what we need to do here is going to say store.count ++. And now we have a counter that works, right? And so the thing, again, if you pause for a second, the thing to understand is from a developer's point of view, I'm just writing components. Like I'm not thinking about like, is it running on a server, on a client? I'm just writing components and so on and so forth, right? So if I refresh this page, then of course, no JavaScript executes, right? So we are this resumable world. So we start with no JavaScript. But if I go and interact, then I will download first piece of code, which does the incrementing of the count. The second piece of code is the framework itself, like that had to get downloaded. And then we downloaded basically just the component that knows how to re-render the counter, right? So notice that in here, we have two components, this one and this one. Actually, if you think about it, we have a lot more components than that. We have this component, we have the header component, we have the footer component, we have the counter component, right? Like this page over here already has probably around 10 components in here, but if you look at what actually got downloaded, we only downloaded the stuff that was strictly necessary, right? We needed the handler to deal with count plus plus, right? The listener, right? So that this piece of code here got extracted out. We needed the framework, obviously, so that's this piece right here. And we needed a JSX to update. This is another bit of framework that you can ignore. But we needed the JSX to re-render. And notice again how the system was very surgical and basically said, actually, the only thing I need to download is just this particular thing and not anything else. And so kind of the value add here of Qwik is that as a developer, you basically don't have to think about it. Like, I just write my code as I've always written about it. And the code gets broken up into pieces. It gets bundled. It gets prefetched. You know, all of the stuff that normally would be super difficult to do in a framework just kind of magically happen in here. Does that make sense?
So just someone asked something about the AST analysis. I want to say that existing bundlers like Rollup, Webpack, all the ones in the system, they are good to bundle things, literally putting things together, right? And which is a fancy word for concatenation without conflicts, right? Like they can concatenate pieces of JavaScript without resolving like conflicts, basically. That's what Rollup can do really well. But what these frameworks cannot, these bundlers cannot do is actually take different, like you have a file with different functions, take these functions into breaking things apart. That's what none of the bundlers do. So the way the compiler works in Qwik is that we implemented this thing called optimizer. But the thing it does is that it breaks apart into as many little chunks as possible. So in that mode, when Misko is playing with it, you will see a lot of files, right? Because that's literally the output of the optimizer. It's all the individual, the thinnest thing it can do. But the good thing is that when you actually bundle for production, you can actually put things back together, right? So if you know that, the click handler of this component always causes a re-rendering of this other component, this always, you download all these three files together, like the bundler can put it back. So Qwik is still leverage on other bundlers. Like we use Vite with Rollup and ESB, like that's still works with Qwik. The only thing that we do before is to run the optimizer, which splits into a lot of small chunks.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of show the build thing. We kind of been in the hot module reloading world. This is actually production build. And so here you can see that there are fewer files that got generated. These are the Q files. And I think if I do Q dash,
you can even have one file. Like if you want to, you can even have just one, right? Here we have, and the interesting thing is that in other frameworks, right? If you want to change the bundling, you actually have to go to your code and change it, right? You have to add dynamic imports. You have to do like reorganize. You have to actually go to the code and change things around. In Qwik, the bundling is a configuration thing. Your code is stable. Like code never changes. Now, how things are bundling, how things are put together is like different thing, independent of your source code. Which is also like interesting because you can play and experiment with that without having to change a single bit.
So here I'm just showing a production build of the same website. And these are all the bundles we generate. You can see as Q prefix. And they get all prefetched ahead of time. So they don't execute, they just prefetch, right? And then when you click the +1, it's instantaneous because they can come out of the cache. I have the cache disabled, that's why it's not showing up here. Let me enable it. Let me do empty cache and hard reload. Right. So here things get downloaded, and when I hit +1, it's all coming out of the disk cache. So it's all taken care of you basically. You just don't have to think about it. But let's go back to the dev mode again. In here. And I think, somebody asked about dynamic tree shaking. So existing tree shaking is kind of like bread and butter of frameworks today, right? Like every single framework has tree shaking. But the problem is that if you look at an application such as this one right here, right, you would recognize that like, the application has to have an entry point, right? There's a main method equivalent somewhere in a system, right? So for example, the Next.js probably gives you the main method that says like, this is where you have to kind of enter so that I can do reconciliation, hydration, and all the other stuff and get your application going. And then the main method has a reference to the root component of your application. And the root component then has a reference to the layout, which has a reference to the header, to the footer, to your components, to the click listener, and everything else, right? So you start at the root and you basically bring the whole thing with you. So existing systems basically have this problem that to them, the place where the tree shaking starts is the root of the application. And because it's the root of the application, they drag everything with it, right? And so an existing application would be relatively huge in Next.js. So again, let's go back to this example here. The amount of code the biggest piece is this one, which is 28 kilobytes. And that's the framework itself. Everything else is like tiny. And the reason why everything else is tiny is because Qwik was able to correctly deduce that all these other components are actually not needed. And so like, don't even bother downloading them, right? And so they're not here. And the reason it can deduce that is because instead of starting the tree shaking process from the root of the application, which is what all existing systems do, and I call this particular process the static process because they have to do it before the application is even running. Instead of that, Qwik does what we call dynamic tree shaking, where it says, we rendered the page on a server, and we're now on the client, and so there is no need to be able to re-render the page from the root. Like it's already done. Like we don't need to think about it, right? And instead, the Qwik says like, what are the possible ways you can interact with the page? And so in this particular case, the possible ways is we put a listener on the side of the welcome, right? This one over here. And so it is, it does the hello world, right? So that's one listener. And the other listener is over here. And so Qwik can correctly say like, because those two things are the only ways I can interact with the application, then tree shake starting from that point of view. Don't tree shake starting from the root of the application problem. Tree shake from the point of view of like, I am only, I click here, right? So tree shake from the point of view of, calling alert. And because there's nothing there, if you start from that point of view, of course the tree shaker is going to like remove everything because like, well, you don't need anything. You just need the alert. You're done. But if you go and interact in the second kind, then in here, there is a reference to the Qwik core, right? And so this is what brings the other pieces in as well. And so you start from a different point of view, and so you then tree shake in a different way. And so the kind of the magical bit out of this thing, and I don't have a better name for this other than that we call this the dynamic tree shaking. So it is like tree shaking, and you think you're going to end up with the same exact thing, but the end result is vastly different. The amount of code that we are able to remove is huge. So if we go to our homepage, which is this one right here, this is a big page, right? Like there's lots of text in here and so on and so forth. The only code that gets kept after the tree shaking is done is the code for the menu, because that's the only way you can interact with this app, right? This is the only thing you can do. So we only keep the menu for the app, and all the other stuff that you see on a page gets thrown away. And to me, like that is the huge selling point of Qwik, right? There's two things going on in here. First of all, when the application wakes up, there's no JavaScript to run, right? So that's one huge selling point. And the second huge selling point is that the code that we do download to the client, it is significantly tree shaking, like way better than you can possibly do with existing frameworks, because our entry points are the entry points of the interactivity, not the entry points of the whole application itself. Sorry, I've been chatting for a long time. Does that make sense, what I've just been saying?
There is a question. How do you know to consider which state belongs to to which lexical scope. Can you explain a bit what you mean with the question?
There's a piece of state which has to do sometimes maybe initial state or whatever. How would you know that you keep the state throughout? Like if you split up a piece of code, maybe the state belongs to, I don't know, the module scope. Maybe the state belongs to somewhere else in the system. Are there no problems of code getting detached from its state or something like that?
So we have this serialization here. When the application wakes up, we serialize the state of the application to Qwik.js. And oh, by the way, Manu, like this is serializing way too much stuff in here. I don't know why. It's something to look into. I don't think we should be serializing that much.
I think it's the new, when we updated Qwik City, there is some pieces of things that it thinks are reactive, but they're not. That's
okay.
why.
Side note, this is going to get fixed. This thing that you will see serialized here, the only thing that should be serialized here is 1, 2, 3 is this thing right here. So where is it? Yeah, where is it? Come on, somewhere in here you should be. Here we go. So here's our state here, and then our count, yeah. Okay, where's the count? Here we go. So this is the object, right? The only thing you should see here is this object right here saying that we're serializing the count. And this thing points to 15, which is 1, 2, 3. It's kind of flattened out because we want to be able to serialize things that are not acyclic. So like if you have cycles inside of your graphs, etc., we can handle that no problem. But anyway, so this is kind of the serialization of it, right? And so the magical part here, right? The thing that's hard to do is if you go back to the VM analogy, we talked about like how VMs can run inside of your host machine. And at some point you kind of freeze them, right? You save them to the disk and ship them across. And then the new host VM can continue where you left off. And the reason it can continue to where you left off is because everything is serialized, including the memory and so on and so forth. And so this particular bit over here is kind of our serialization magic, and we can go in here and serialize stuff.
I think
now, yeah.
No, it was if you're going to say about particular the QRL aspect, because I think that's the one that he was more specifically asking, like the use lexical scope, how use lexical scope, right? Executed there suddenly gets you that value, right?
Okay, so let's talk about that. So let's go to the network tab, and I click here, and I will get, click here, and I will get the alert box. And I downloaded a piece of code, which is the alert over here. This code here should not be surprising anybody, right? You look at this, you go like, yeah, of course, easy, no problem. Like that makes total sense. But so that's this code right here, right? It's easy to pull this out. But the code over here, this is problematic, right? Because if I make a copy of this, and I say export lazy whatever equals this, export const. Notice what it's complaining about. It says like, what is store? Like you can't just take this function. It's not function, it's closure. You can't take this closure out of its context and move it somewhere else, because doing so destroys your reference, right? And so this is the kind of the hard problem of that Qwik solves, which is, you wrote this and you would like to somehow lazy load this piece of code, but you can't just do this. This is not going to work because, as you can see, store is not a reference that can be found, right? So the store is complaining. So if you look at what actually happens when I hit +1, the code that gets downloaded, notice what we do. We inserted this piece of code over there that recovers the lexical scope, right? And so this is the bit that makes the magic possible, right? This is the thing that says, in order for you to run, I need to recover the state of the function so that the function can run. Because to say oh yeah, you're incrementing something, that's easy to load that behavior. That's not the hard part, right? The hard part is incrementing what? Like what exactly is the current value that I should be starting for? So in this particular case, the current value is 123 and I want to go to 124. So I need to somehow recover this. And so I call this function amnesia. right? These functions, when you lazy load them, they have no clue what's going on. They have amnesia. They have forgotten everything. And so the magical part of Qwik is, okay, we can make the functions remember stuff and recover things so they can continue running where they left off, right? This is what resumability means, is that when we lazy load a function, we recover its state in such a way that the function can continue running where it left off, right? And this is why the VM analogy is so appropriate, because that's exactly what's happening. Like all of the state of the system, it gets serialized in such a way that when you go and click on that +1 button, you don't have to do anything else. You literally just like recover the state, increment the state, and you're done, right? And that's kind of the magic of it. So is the state embedded inside HTML itself? Yes, the state is embedded. And so if I refresh this and I go here, this is that Qwik JSON thing, right? This is the state of the system. And when I interact with it, when I hit +1, notice that that state gets consumed. It gets kind of destroyed in the process, right? So the serialization is this bit right here that does the magic over there. Questions?
So on the server-side rendering, you guys had to identify store as a context of that function?
Yes.
Yes. So basically, these objects at runtime are marked in a special way so that we can recognize it. The other thing that happens is that we recognize the fact that store has a count here, and therefore we recognize that when the count increments, when we modify this particular thing, we have to go and update the count, right? If you're familiar with MobX, this is exactly MobX, right? This is a proxy. Incrementing this particular value causes an invalidation of this particular component, which then causes us to download that component and then re-render it. But notice the system knows that only this component is attached to the store, not this one, right? So when the invalidation happens, when we basically say that component needs to be re-rendered, we can focus on just this component and nothing else. Okay, I want to make another example, which I think is super cool. And let's just make a new one called clock. But before I do that, I'm going to just put a div here and say scroll. I'm going to say style is height, I think it is. And say 500 pixels. Yeah, that's how it works. So export const clock equals component. Yep. Notice I'm just like really building components like I always build. Like I don't have to think about it, right? So return, let's just say, oops, current time is, okay. And then if I scroll, then here is my thing that says current time is. Now, I would actually like to show the current time. So of course I have to do a couple of things in here. I have to create a store. And I have to say time. Let's say time is null for now. And then I'm going to render it. So I'm going to say string of store.time. And syntax error. Okay, so if I scroll to the bottom, here's our time, etc. I don't have to show you. If you look at the network tab, obviously this is all dead code, right? Like the system looked at this stuff and said, like, you don't need any JavaScript to make this work. So why should I download anything? And I don't. And so no JavaScript is over here. So it's just a static page. The hard part is making it interactive. So let's say we actually want to update the time. So let's do use client effect. And we don't need this. And what we're going to do here is just going to create a timer. So const equals set interval. And the function we want to run here is, oh yeah, so actually it has to be called update. Update equals store time new date dot, it's new date, I think.
Not now.
No, it's going to be day. I think it is fine. So let's see.
I think that's a class. No?
Is that a problem? I thought we were serializing.
Not yet. Not
Not yet.
yet.
Clear interval ID. So let's make this here. Let's do this differently. And so say string. Okay, how's that? So this thing is happy. This client effect has to be imported. Okay. So let's refresh it. And the current time is, and it's because I forgot to call it eagerly here. Hold on, there's a little delay. And so you can see that this particular time updates, right? And so this is kind of the beauty, right, of Qwik, is that I don't have to think. Sorry, there's somebody's background noise. I think it's Dor Eden. Yeah, here we go. Thank you. So the nice thing is we didn't have to, think about anything here. We just said like, hey, I want you to go and update the time every second, right? Now, let me show this to you from the point of view from the code, actually. Let's push this even further. Let's do 600. Okay, no JavaScript is on a page here. If I go to the div, the DOM, let's go to scroll. Here is our time, just says current time is, and there's nothing in here, right? And when I scroll it into the view is when the network kicks in, the code downloads, and everything starts running. And I think that's kind of cool because doing something like this in existing frameworks is super difficult. Like if you want to just say like, oh, I don't do something until it's actually visible for the user, it essentially becomes impossibly difficult to do because existing frameworks have to do everything eagerly. They have this thing called hydration, and delaying work until later is actually very, very hard. Does that make sense? So we have this use client effect. And the interesting thing about this use client effect is that it has options. And the default option is, what's the default option? No, they're not helping. It's visible, right? So this default option basically says, execute this piece of code when the stuff becomes visible. So you see like in here, nothing is happening. But when I scroll it into the view, immediately the code starts updating. Now, what we can do is we can just say, do it eager, and so load. And so in this case, if you notice, it still shows visible. Did I not save? Why is this not working? What am I doing wrong, guys? Manu and Adam. Run load. But it's still showing Q visible.
Maybe you're not doing anything wrong, Misko.
Maybe it's broken.
Check it out.
Format your hard drive and start again.
Sorry, this should have changed to Q init, and you should have seen that this thing should have eagerly been downloaded and eagerly should have started updating. Looks like there's some kind of a bug because that's the whole point of load.
Good for the pull request.
Yes.
To be easy.
Right. So it's either load or visible, right? Load being eager and visible being like the normal behavior. Actually, yeah, that's interesting that it does not. Is it innate? Did we change the name? No.
No. Don't worry. I mean, yeah.
It's run, right?
Yes, yes.
It's long, but it should be. It's a wrong event here. Anyways, you get the idea. So the basic thing is that the magical part, right? The thing that is different, the thing that when you compare Qwik to existing frameworks, the thing that is really like completely different is not the syntax. It's not how you build the components. The components you build in a very predictable way that you would build in any framework, right? The magical bit is what happens to these components on runtime and how all of the code gets lazy loaded, right? Like how the code only becomes available when it's needed. So to go to the network tab again, let's go over here, right? No JavaScript on a page. The clock comes into view, the cloud code runs. I hit +1, more code executes. I click on this thing, even more code downloads, right? So it's very progressive about how the code gets to the client, how it executes the code. And of course, it's very also what we call dynamic tree shaking, which is like most of the code actually never got to the client because the framework basically said, you know, this heading thing never changes. The footer never changes. So why should I be sending code to the client that never ever changes? And so all of the code gets thrown away. Now, the examples we've gone through are extremely simple, right? There's nothing complex about it, but now scale it up to like a humongous application, right? And as you're scaling it up, you realize huge amount of savings can happen. So my favorite example is, if you go to Amazon, let's pick something at random. So here's your product, right? There is a complicated menu system. There is another menu system here. There is a shopping cart. There's huge amount of code. I mean, text here. There are questions and answers. You can interact with these things, right? So the magical bit here is that like, we don't need to download all this stuff all at once. Instead, we need to just download the bits that are necessary. So I'm pretty sure that if I zoom out, it probably won't show me. I noticed that a lot of things lazy load, like for example, you see that the response lazy loaded here? Here, let me go to the bottom. There is no comments, and then comments lazy load later, right? So Amazon is doing a trick because they're recognizing this page is huge. We can't download all the code ahead of time. And so we're doing lazy loading in here. But doing that with existing frameworks is actually quite difficult and challenging. Doing it with Qwik is just kind of what you get out of the box. Now, here with the lazy loading content, that's below the fold, and that's a little more complicated. And Qwik can do that as well. So let me show you actually that trick. So here's our homepage. If I zoom out, and if I refresh, the content's missing. This is existing homepage that we have. The content is fully loaded, right? So not only is JavaScript not even downloading, even some sections of the content are not even downloading until you start scrolling. Same thing I believe also happens on this page as well. So if I zoom out, oops, not this one. I zoom out and I refresh. See, content is missing, and then you start scrolling, content shows up. So these are all just a whole bunch of tricks that the system can do in order to kind of get the performance, right? So the philosophy of Qwik is like that the performance problem needs to be the framework problem. It is not a developer problem because we think the developer actually has very few levers to actually influence this thing. Instead, we want to make the performance the framework's problem. And so that's kind of the huge differentiator. And we think that over time, people will just recognize the value of this and say like, hey, you know, I'll keep building websites and they're all slow. And then I'm trying to do complicated things in order to kind of make it work, but nothing really kind of fixes it. Like, for example, Amazon is recognizing that they cannot use React, Angular, or anything else. They're still on jQuery because, well, they can't afford to pay the cost of hydration. So they're manually kind of have this kludgy system, which is a mix of server-side rendered content and also like way of attaching behavior to the UI, right? Qwik basically says, no, instead of like you solving this problem yourself, just have components, go build them the way you would expect to build these components. And let me figure out how to not load certain parts, how to delay load, how to break up the code so that not everything's there, and so on and so forth. So currently it's 10:15, 10:12. And I want to open it up to questions. And then I am sorry, but at 10:25, we have a hard limit and we have to leave. And so that's why this is a little shorter today. But yeah, questions that you might have, I would love to answer them.
I want to answer a question of Jonathan Geller. So this tutorial is to prepare us to the contribution workshop that going to be in the next week, and also to know better Qwik.
Yeah, so we have, let's go to the Qwik side. That's, I guess, the Qwik side. Let's reset the view.
And
so if you go into our, for example, tutorial, there is lots of content that we've created. Or if you go to the documentation, there's content we created. It would be great to kind of help with like, does this actually make sense? Is it actually, are there mistakes, you know, is it actually answering the correct questions? People who are new to this particular thing, are we explaining things in the best possible way so that the people have their aha moments as soon as possible? And so that's kind of the goal the next week.
There is also these examples. I don't know if we, example page. And yeah, like there are simple examples of doing simple things. I guess like there's a below the fold Hacker News app. It will be nice. I think like in Qwik, we still have some feature. We don't really have any like sample apps. And I really like learning by example. So maybe if you learn something you can actually contribute like another example doing some and choose a cool emoji to put here. And we will be super happy to merge it.
One more thing about the workshop next week. I send you a form to register to the workshop. Please fill the form, and I will send you a mail if you can join, because we have a limit of 30 people.
I have a kind of a high level question for the audience, and it is that I feel like we've been struggling to kind of explain how Qwik is different and why, why Qwik is something that you actually need. And I'm just kind of curious, like, did people feel like they got the difference, or they're still confused on it? Or like, do they think this is like, oh my gosh, yes, that's definitely what we need? Or like, yeah, that's cute, but like, who cares? I'm just curious where people stand.
Okay, so I'm gonna answer for that question. My name is Jonathan. I'm really new here, and I just hear from my uncle about this workshop. So I think Qwik is really nice. I'm coming from the world of React, client side, and Angular, and I didn't know what about the instant loading. So it looks really good. It's really, it sounds really important and really up to date for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a question about the Qwik. Everything you said was great. However, I'm wondering about the convention and styling of the code, because this is one of the things that I see that make it difficult to switch jobs and start a new team and new projects, and it's very difficult in the front-end side. Mm-hmm. Are you thinking about make it more strict in Qwik, or it will be loose like React?
That's a good question. I think it's a question we don't have the bandwidth to kind of focus on just yet. So I think the answer right now is it's pretty loose, just kind of like React. But I think over time, like especially community would be awesome things if community stepped up and said like, hey, we think the best practices are these around them and so on. By the way, one thing I haven't talked about is this $signs. And I'm just going to do very quickly, which is that every time you see a $sign, it's a lazy loaded boundary. So $signs are everywhere in Qwik because they are part of the API. And it is the thing that allows for all the lazy loading to happen. So every time you see a $sign, you should be thinking to yourself like, oh, this is a lazy loaded boundary. This is a lazy loaded boundary here, here, and so on and so forth.
We love the
important to know?
What is it?
It is mandatory?
The $signs are mandatory because they're part of the TypeScript type system. So if you, if you forget to put it, like if you just delete it.
Basically, there is no component without the $sign. It's just like a hint, because we need to know what you can refer to. You have restrictions because of the lazy loaded boundaries that you cannot do And these are like the trade-offs, right? Between like writing just an SPA, when you write, you know, an instant app, okay, or like a serializable app, you need to know about these restrictions, and maybe we could talk about it next time. Anyway, guys, I need to go. See you next week, okay? And thank you very much for everything.
Bye, Shai. Good luck.
There's one thing, if it's, the question is, it looks like Qwik really introduces a performance boost, which might be significant more. So is, I don't know if the fastest horse is what solves like the front end problem. I don't know, quite yet. So like speed is very important. I like vanilla because of that. So
yes, speed is very important for us, but it's not just any kind of speed, right? A lot of times frameworks will argue about who is fastest at rendering. Like, we can insert items into your table this fast versus that fast, right? And I'm gonna say, like, I don't think it matters, because whether you choose React, Angular, Svelte, Vue, whatever you choose, like, we all are capable of building apps that are plenty of fast in all of these frameworks, right? So the speed isn't about how fast you can render. The speed is about how fast can the application come up, right? I navigate, there's a link in a Twitter that I click on and I navigate, and it's like selling me shoes or something, right? How long before like I can click the add to the shopping cart button, right? And existing frameworks are really bad at this because even if they show you the shoe, the button isn't working until the hydration is finished. And in the mobile device on a slow network, that can be tens of seconds that we're talking about, right? And so what Qwik is after is basically saying, look, even if you're on a mobile device, even if you're on a slow network, it doesn't matter, because the amount of JavaScript we cut down as much as we could, and we removed the hydration so we can just continue where we left off. And so we made this extremely fast, even on mobile device. And this is why we mean what we mean by instant app.
Perhaps showing this demo throttled could put a bang in it next time.
Okay, yeah. Actually, the one demo that I like to show is you can disable JavaScript, and you can go on our website, and you're going to be like, oh yeah, the JavaScript is disabled, but like the app pretty much still works. The thing that doesn't work is the menu system is broken, right? The menus don't work. Okay, I can't click on this because the JavaScript is disabled. But for the most part, the application works. Also, if you go to the tutorial, obviously the content doesn't show up here, but the content here shows up. This doesn't work, but the rest of it kind of works. Same thing for Playground, right? Things will kind of, the actual pieces that have to run in the browser, they don't work, but the rest of it kind of works. And it's kind of amazing, because all of that stuff that still works is stuff that was on a server, right? And it's this stuff that we get to skip on the client. Now, again, disabling JavaScript, not a full thing, right? So if I go to the local host and I'm here and it is disable JavaScript, I can't click on stuff. It's broken, right? Nothing works. But for the most part, the page is there. So that, yeah.
And one thing I want to real quick add is, like, one difference with React is, you got to learn all these optimizations, like use memo, do this optimization, do that. But you have to run that JavaScript to know to be optimized, right? Whereas Qwik already knows, like, it's not possible to re-render this. You're not even going to get the JavaScript. We're not even going to try to re-render it. It's able to skip a large chunk of code, that whereas all the other frameworks need to think about, like, let's run this code to see if we can run it faster or not run it at all. So that's one, like, high level, I guess, difference.
And one of I think fundamentally you can see that Qwik can do things that other frameworks can do. We have something called Qwik React, and it's something that you cannot implement with other frameworks, right? And Qwik React is basically taking the ability of Qwik to not run code to actually make other frameworks to not load code and partial hide render. It's probably a whole talk, right? But pretty much, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Astro, as this framework allows you to partial hydrate. Astro was built to implement that, right? To implement partial hydration in other frameworks. In Qwik, you can kind of implement your own Astro. Like in 100 lines of code, you can call the React API in the server to put the HTML, and then using the thing that Misko saw before, the use client effect that only goes when something is visible or some triggers some functionality when some event triggers, to actually partial hydrate the React application inside. And this sounds a lot, but we actually have a working demos of this. I have a Loom somewhere I could share. I don't know if everyone here is in a Discord or not, but I could share the link.
Oh, yeah, we should talk about the social. Yes, share on the link. Do come to our Discord channel. So if you come to our homepage, which is right here, here's your Discord stuff. And if you have Twitter accounts and you thought this was impressive or mind-blowing, like, go on Twitter and tell the world that this is different. The hardest thing that we're struggling with, again, is that people look at all these frameworks and they're like, oh, yet another framework. Why should I care? And I think we're making a really good case that this is not yet another framework. The thing that Qwik can do, other frameworks just cannot. And that's the hard part of the messaging here that we're trying to get out. Okay, we have 1 minute and we have to bolt.
Also, share a link to join the Discord. There we we are talking about, we are building latest thing we just released with Qwik City, but we'll have Qwik React soon, and there's a lot of interesting community there, like contributing and like giving us a lot of feedback, and it's literally driving the decision making in the framework. So if you wanna check it out what is happening, just please join the link in the chat, the Discord channel.
Can you please also send in the Discord the registration form for next week?
Yes, so I put it there in the chat.
Yes, I put it multiple times. Also in the meetup page, you have it.
Okay.
Okay, I think we have to go. I apologize. We have another presentation to do and has to start at a specific time, so we cannot be late. I hope you found this enjoyable. Otherwise, I will see you next week. Bye.
It was great. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you very much.